Fantastic. Well, thank you for the introduction, mates. Let's get on with our journey into automation, folks. Let's go. Now then, this is, I believe, probably what most people think about when you start talking about automation. You can always rely on XKCD for a good comic, a good relevant, sarcastic comic a lot of days. But yeah, people think about saving time, right? And if you follow this grid, it's quite cool, really. It's partly sarcastic, but partly true. In that, let's say you have got a task that you do daily, following this column, and it's you can shave off 5 minutes by automating it. You could spend up to 6 days in order to get payback over 5 years. If you spend more than 6 days actually developing the automation, it's pretty pointless. You may as well have just carried on doing it because you've wasted more time by trying to automate it, right? No, there's a bit of sarcasm there, but automation is about saving time, but it's much more than that. It is, that is not the entire end game. And especially when, as you'll find out, the field of automation across IT, or even the subset of IT that is IT security, is so broad. Now, this is something that the majority of you have probably seen or seen something similar. They're kind of infamous in terms of how broad they are, but kind of comically broad in a way. How do you even start digesting something like this? This is the CNCF Landscape. And if you go and type in Google or whatever search engine you prefer, automation tools or automation security, you will get hundreds, if not thousands, of options, tools, opinions, and more. And so there is so much automation to be had. This landscape is being CNCF is effectively, you could call it the world of DevOps. And there's so much automation in here. Where do you even start, right? So that is the introduction to what I'm hopefully going to talk about and convince you or give you some inspiration around security automation, which is automate all the security things, but how? This is basically going to be an introduction to this topic, really. I'm aiming for around about half an hour. So I will give an open offer that if anyone wants to go deeper into any sort of individual part of this, feel free to give me a shout. It's a topic I live and breathe every day, so I'm more than happy to chat afterwards or at some other time. I've tried to have some high level parts to this and also some technical parts to suit every audience member, hopefully. So I hope you get something from this. So I'd like to propose that really going about automating all the security things, we really need to start as in kind of classic Simon Sinek style, I guess, with his infamous book, start with why. I work with people on automation projects all day, every day, and the number of people that start without a clear business objective or a clear organizational driver as to why they're doing this can become unstuck along the way, especially when it comes to going to convince other parts of the business to work with you, which is what's going to happen, or getting funding and other things like that. So I really kind of try to evangelize this part that let's start with the why and get a good reason as to why we're doing this. And we'll talk about that shortly. Also in this 25-30 minutes, we'll then talk about how. And for me, the how is very much about breaking things into digestible pieces, rather than trying to boil the ocean, as the cliche goes, to get to our ultimate goal, which is, we're looking to automate security. So we're basically going to be codifying it as much as possible. And along the way, the idea is to get it so that we have security, covered consistently as possible across our infrastructure and as comprehensively as possible. So we'll see if we can't cover all that in 25 to 30 minutes. And who am I? I am a bona fide Brummie. I don't think my accent's that thick, but it comes across every so often. These two here are real pictures in my kitchen. If you look closely, you'll see that there's a little Hawthorns up here. Yes, I am a Baggies fan. Apologies to all the Birmingham City fans for that 4-0 defeat the other day. But the one thing that Baggies fans and Blues fans can at least console themselves with is laughing at Villa and the Jack Grealish situation. But that's enough about football. I also did happen to see one of the best run chases I've seen for a while last night at the Birmingham Phoenix at Edgbaston. So yes, I am a local Brummie. I know in these days of virtual conferences, the audience here could be from anywhere, and certainly people watching back on YouTube. Welcome to Birmingham. I've worked at various places over the years, done technical support and professional services, pre-sales, a whole bunch of stuff. So hopefully I've got some kind of insight to give you. And if you do want to follow any of my ramblings or look at any of my dodgy code, these are my handles. But enough about me. The team I work in Palo Alto Networks, we kind of come up with this as like a mission almost, a statement as to what we kind of we'll go to customers and talk about, which is by increasing speed, consistency, quality, and reliability of tasks, automation will help us. And it's not only about our own environment. It is, yeah, I guess we'll talk about this in the next session with Keith, but it's also the fact that we have evolving attackers who are increasingly using automation themselves. So if we're not automating and being fast, we're going to be a step behind the attackers. And I think that's probably a statement that most people on this call or watching this video afterwards would probably agree with and already know. So bought into this as a mission that our team is doing at Palo Alto Networks, where we go out and help customers and talk to them about this subject matter. So how do we do it? I said that the first thing we do is start with the why. And most organizations we work with, the why tends to fall into one of these three buckets. So by automating your security, you can, for example, increase your speed and business agility. That kind of goes without saying. We all know that you should be able to do a task quicker if you're automating it. There should be less errors as well, which also helps with the second part, which is reducing complexity, reducing cost. But also by taking boring and repetitive tasks off human beings, we can give them time back to do something that's more valuable. Probably also helps with retention because they're not doing boring stuff all the time. And because we're not just IT, we're IT security, and I guess most people watching this will identify as security as some form of their profession. We're looking to protect at the same time as making things faster and more reliable and consistent. So that's what we're after. And talking about the why, it's probably always going to fall into one of those three. There's probably others, but those are the three main ones that we see most often. So when you are thinking about that why, those are the kind of business level objectives that you want to align to and think about when you're talking to the rest of the organization about going about your automation journey, especially when you're first starting. So then the how, and this is going to be the bulk of it. Now, the team that I work in at Palo, we started classifying security automation to kind of give us that digestible way to think about it. Otherwise, it seems like a huge mountain to go out about automating everything. Now, I couldn't talk about all these three topics in detail in half an hour, right? I could probably do 2 or 3 hours on each of these. So I'm giving you the high level. I've tried to pick 1 or 2 interesting bits out of these categories, I guess, to talk to you about today. So deploying day 1, followed by all your configuration and day 2 type tasks, your ongoing CRUD operations and maintenance, as well as some response activity, which is obviously a key part of IT security. So the day 1, probably arguably the most relevant, I guess, to an OWASP audience, given that infrastructure is largely being described and deployed as code, as software almost today. So very, very close to our hearts. And yeah, automation in the deploy phase is generally talking about the build. There's a couple of interesting points here, and some of this will seem obvious, like we need our source of truth, our data. Then we'll pass that data in some kind of build tool that's going to, something like Terraform, cloud formation in the cloud world, for example. It's going to talk to our cloud provider, whether it's public or private, via its APIs, maybe some other products and services via their APIs, and eventually we get to a deployed infrastructure. I would argue, and it's an argument we could probably have over a pint next time we do meet up face to face, that the source of truth is possibly the most important one of the whole lot. And it's, in our experience, the one that's overlooked the most. Going into an automation project, be it large or small, without a good, stable foundation of a source of truth, is kind of just going to automate really fast to failure. So inconsistent data going into your pipelines or into your build tools, however you choose to deploy it, the actual build process is going to be painful. And of course, this being a kind of software type deployment almost, a software life cycle in a way, but just for infrastructure. We expect test and validation. So we expect that we do similar things that real software developers do, right? Quote unquote. In terms of unit testing, integration testing, validating what we do is sound and it's going to work. But we've also got to secure it along the way. That's the whole point of us being security professionals, right? Now, securing along the way, when we're doing infrastructure as code, that gets quite interesting. So if we look at the stages you might go through, this isn't prescriptive. There's probably other ways that you could describe how you go through infrastructure as code. But here's one, for example, where we have code in the IDE, pre-commit phase, then integration into our source code, maybe a pipeline, and then full deployment into runtime, into production. Now, what we find is that infrastructure as code being the way it is, there's a lot of templates, there's a lot of declarative nature of infrastructure. So we're saying, this is what I want. And that tends to lend itself to reuse quite a lot, which is good because we don't want to rewrite code all the time. Again, it's mimicking real software, if you will. You know, we want to write modules that we can reuse so that we get it right once, and then that's great. But if we get it wrong, you know, if we do bring in an error into a template, if that template is then used tens or even hundreds of times in different deployments over different regions of cloud or for different use cases, you find that one error in that one template where you didn't strap down the Amazon S3 bucket and left it wide open to the world, to use the classic cliche example, just gets multiplied and amplified. And that one template error multiplies out, and then you end up with hundreds or thousands of security alerts, and obviously you may end up in the news, right? Which is what we don't want. So over time, as you go through an infrastructure as code lifecycle, you'll find that it gets harder and harder to go back and fix those things. So we want to get things done as early as possible. And this is, of course, to most people, I try not to use too many buzzword cliches, but this is the whole shift left idea, right? Making our scans and security checks as early as possible. Now, there's an argument that this isn't really happening. My company, Palo Networks, did a cloud threat report a few months ago. You're welcome to scribble down the URL or grab that QR code for the URL. And if you want to read more, but the highlights from the report were some big numbers about going off and us researching all the infrastructure as code community and landscape and finding some bad practices. So it's clearly something that we need to work on. And there's probably lots of reasons for this. People not understanding what they're doing, or just copy and pasting from Stack Overflow. Most recently, you've probably seen GitHub introducing AI that's going to write code for you, and it's based on code that's already there. So if lots of us are doing bad things, then we're just going to proliferate that with the AI, which seems like an interesting proposition. So that's the impact of the amplification process. You have a few people making a couple of errors in templates, but when those templates are used widely, then you start to get some big numbers, basically. So we need to get this right as early as possible. And there's different ways to do this. IDE stage, we can have plugins, we can integrate with source code, we can do registry scans for containers, and we can insert ourselves into pipelines and all sorts of good stuff. So without further ado, I am going to drop into a demo. So let's see if the gods are with me today. Pause for some water, give yourselves time to think as well. Okay, so this is a repo. It's open, you can go and have a look at it. And it's called GCP Goats. This is forked from Bridgecrew. Bridgecrew makes some great ISC security tools. Full disclosure, they have been acquired by Palo, but all of these tools are free, so I'm not on the sell, don't worry. You can go and use these gratis. Now, Bridgecrew made some vulnerable by design, intentionally bad Terraform with which to test tools and for people to sort of kick the tires with stuff like this. So I've forked some of that, and this is just some Terraform code here that's going to potentially deploy a whole bunch of stuff into GCP, some cloud infrastructure, some networking, a couple of VMs, some storage, SQL. You get the idea. So what we're going to do is have a look at how this might go, and if I bring up my my IDE, this is the same repo, GCP Goats, and let's walk through what someone, a developer or otherwise, might do if they want to go and deploy some infrastructure as code. Now, this is, you don't need to know Terraform that well. I can tell you roughly what's going on here, in that this is a block of code that's going to deploy a Google SQL database, if you can read there at the top, and there's some parameters and bits and bobs and things like that. So what I'm going to do is say that I'm a developer. I'm going to copy and paste this down the bottom because I need a new database. And I'm going to call this one. I'm just going to append it with the number 2. And I go, yeah, that looks good. That's my database ready to go. I need it for whatever application I'm building. Let's save that. And when we talked about the IDE plugins, this is one of the tools from Bridgecrew called Checkoff. You can see it's going away and doing its scan. It's got across saying we've got some issues. It's flagged it up here. There's 7 of them. You see there's 7 problems in this file. Now I can go to this block of code from my SQL database and it's telling me I've got some things wrong. These are the errors in infrastructure as code that we don't want to see. So this one, for example, at the very top, all cloud SQL databases should require incoming connections to use SSL. That sounds fair enough. We don't really want plain text interactions with our database, especially over the internet. I can click through and it's going to give me a description. It's got, obviously Bridgecrew got their own labels for it, but the main thing really for the person who's declaring this infrastructure as code is that it tells us what is going on and why we recommend that you do something. So there we go. If we go back to our code, got some now this is the nice thing, right? You want to be trying to find tools, not just Checkoff, there's other tools and other bits and bobs where the fixes are obvious to the people who are writing the code and it helps them in their world. So while I'm still in the IDE, I've got the option here for fixes. Now, there's two types of fix with this tool. You can generate a skip comment, which is basically a bypass. You don't really want to see that, obviously. That's just kind of, putting your fingers in your ears, go, la, 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 I'm sure it'll be fine. But in these cases, this one here, the Cloud SQL database should have connections using SSL. If I click on this and get and apply a fix, it will actually generate some code there. I hope you saw that. Require SSL now equals true. So that's great. So that's actually fixed one of the 7 issues that I introduced there. And now the scan's redone, and now we're down to 6 issues. So you'd iteratively, go through that, get all your shit in order, so to speak, and off we go. So let's say we've done as much as we wanted to there. So let's go and add that file. And let's go and try and make some mayhem with it, shall we? Let's go and do a git commit -m. This is a new SQL database, and off we go. I need to commit this before I push it to the repo. And look, Checkoff's off again. So this time, this is like the second stage where you could try and catch bad things, before they get pushed into deployment. Checkoff is actually running as part of a pre-commit hook. So when I try and actually check this in and commit it to my repo, you can see it's failed. So Bridgecrew's come to tell me it's the same things I'm going to see in my IDE, but if you either, if developers ignored it or you can't get developers to adopt it, then that's the next stage at which you could try and get visibility, if not protection, from people pushing out bad infrastructure as code. So you can see I've got 4 failed checks here. But the nice thing about the way this tool has been set up for this particular test that I've just shown you is there's actually loads of insecure code in the rest of this repo, but it's actually only flagging the things that I've just done by adding these latest bits of infrastructure as code. It's not telling me about all the other things that everyone else has done. Now let's presume that the developer is worthy enough and decides to go and fix all the things. And I haven't got time in this session to go and fix all the problems that we have in this infrastructure as code. So I'm just going to skip the checks for now, just for the purposes of the demo. And we'll go off and do a no verify, and that will skip the commit. Okay, so now I've committed, so I'm going, hey presto, I can go and push. So let's say your developers or your infrastructure folks are able to ignore the IDE, they're able to get past the git commit somehow. If we go to the repo now, let's give this a quick refresh. Hopefully that's worked. Yep, so new SQL database 22 seconds ago. So there you go. Hey, presto, it's in there. My infrastructure as code has made it in. It's got the SSL bit, which is nice, but we know there are other issues to do with the code I pushed. So what we really want to do is have another place where we can find it. And if you go back to the slide I had earlier, one of them was the CI/CD plugin type style of attack. Now, my last run, my new SQL database, I have actually got GitHub Actions pipeline configured for this. For demo purposes, I can actually show you here in my pipeline definition. I'm actually only running my pipeline if the git commit message includes the phrase demo. So the fact that the code is there, right, that's not really great, but what we should have done is had the pipeline running by default. So let's assume now that the pipeline would have been running by default. So for demo purposes, I've just made a small little change there that allows me to repush. So let's go and re-add that file. And this time I'm just going to append the word demo into my commit message. And this time we should get a nice pipeline running. Again, you probably don't need to know GitHub Actions in detail, but you probably have heard of, if not very well understand, pipelines, and how you can control which branches they execute on, and various conditional statements, and how to execute them, and all the tasks you want to do. And fully enough, one of them that I'm going to run today is Checkoff. I have got soft fail to true. What that means is it won't actually fail the pipeline. If it does find issues, that would normally be set to false, or the default is false. So it would normally fail anything that has got an issue, which would not allow you to carry on. So let's see if that has triggered. This is one of the moments of truth. Yep. So this time it's running. It has passed, like I said. I'm not failing on Checkoff at the moment. I'm letting it go through silently just for the purposes of demo. Like I say, you would normally have that set to false, and it is by default. Now, what you can see here is at the repo level, no matter who is checking code in, I'm actually checking the entire set of Terraform code. So now I've actually found that there's a whole load of other issues. So there's other people been committing code in that have issues. And look, you can choose, obviously we get into the nitty gritty, you can choose which ones you want to fail on and which ones you don't want to fail on, how aggressive you want to be, and so on and so forth. That's a whole different topic. But the possibility is there for you to make sure that at various stages in the IDE, in the commit phase, in the pipeline, that you stop everything. Because the last thing in this pipeline that I haven't got would be that we actually use this Terraform code to go and push all the things that I've described, you know, the new SQL database into live. And if Checkoff fails, then we'll never get that far. So hopefully that makes sense. The last tool I'll show you in the pipeline before I finish up the demo side of this is something called Your, also made by Bridge Crew, also free, so I'm not on the sale, don't worry. But this is something that goes and automatically tags and labels your cloud infrastructure. Sounds like one of the most boring things going, right? Let me just show you why it's useful. So in the instances Terraform, this is where I have a block here, which is defining a virtual server, a VM, effectively in Google Cloud. It's called server. It's the size is an M1 standard. It's got a network interface. Blah 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 blah. It's Linux. Look, see the flavor of Linux there. Not particularly interesting, but that's all we see, right? There's about what 20 lines of code there. If we go to the repo live, we'll see that the instances file there. Now it's been munged by the pipeline. It's got a latest commit message of updated tags by Your, and the Your tool has appended, because here's all the code that we had in my IDE. It's appended all this stuff: labels equals. Now these labels can be applied statically. The first one is an example of a static label that I have applied. I can show you what the config looks like. It's a pretty simple YAML file. And in my pipeline, I also had a static tag here, which I'm adding. But the configuration also allows you to do things like, depending on who committed it, we can therefore set tags about which team they are in. We can also decide whether we tag things as production or operations or development. We can tag compliance tags, all based on conditionals, effectively. So it gets really powerful in terms of how it can tag. But the reason you're probably still saying is, yeah, okay, that James, that's kind of nice, but why do I even care? And it's all about the rest of life when we go into the other phases, right? So the last piece of the jigsaw here is the runtime phase. Now let's say that this virtual machine is in a bad state, whether it's the VM itself, whether it's the web server on it, whether it's the code, the application on top of it. But let's say it's got totally owned, and we're in incident response mode. We can really, really speed up our incident response, and hopefully, as we would expect, automate some of the incident response through a SOAR tool or something similar, help our SOC folks out by giving them as much information as possible when an incident does happen. So the fact that they know straight away who the person was who last modified this, whether it's production or development, which team they're in, that's great. That's great news. In SOAR tools these days, we can start to send messages into chat ops, into Slack or Teams or whatever people are using to tell them something's gone wrong. It helps us notify the right level of management as to the incident. So it helps us automate the SOC and response side of things. And this Your trace also means that when they're looking at the VM in the GCP console, in the Google Cloud console, that string is completely unique. So they will be able to take that string starting BFA3 BB there, paste that into GitHub and find the exact commit, the exact time, and the exact code change with the exact person who actually made that change that ended up in something being vulnerable. So really powerful stuff. Going from labeling and tagging, which some people do, but not consistently. This makes it consistent. It enforces it because it's done in the pipeline, and it makes your life really easy going forwards. So hopefully all of that makes sense. Bit of a whistle-stop tour, got a bit technical, but hopefully some of you enjoyed that. So category of automation number 2, configuration. This is day 2. We've done our deployment, everything's working, but that's not the end of it. Yeah, we're always making adds, moves, changes, and AKA day 2, right? That's what most people call it. Now, I'm going to, again, scratch this at a high level, really, and I'm going to use a tried and tested example of something that always happens in day 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and all of the rest of the days of the world. Firewall rule changes, everyone's favorite topic, right? One of the worst processes in many companies. So how do we break a problem down? Like, we want to automate this. You've got to take it down to its components and then get the right tools for the right job for each of these parts of the process, right? We all know how firewall changes work. Someone has to request it. Then there's a whole lot of people checking it and approving it. And then we finally actually do it and document it. And the documentation bit is probably not even done if it's not automated, let's be honest. So, automation is not a magic wand. If this process is horrible already in your company, it's not going to fix it, but we could at least maybe make it faster. But there's a whole different conversation about culture and getting people to accept automation in terms of making their processes better. So let's go and break this down. There's different ways you could attack it. Build versus buy is like a classic topic of discussion amongst not just IT security, but much broader across IT and actually even further across organizations, right? What is our core competency? What should we be spending our time doing? What should we outsource? What is really our core value here? Does it help us, generate value in the marketplace? And firewall rule changes is quite a debatable one, really. How much value does it really add to us as an organization? But here you go. Let's have a talk through what it would look like. So you could go and buy something. Now, there's loads of firewall management and rule-based automation type tools. There's 4 there. I'm sure there's loads more. Apologies to the vendors I've missed. But at least if you buy something, you can, it's vendor supported. They'll help you. They'll fix it hopefully if it breaks. But it's not massively customizable. It's built in the eyes of the people at the vendor. What they think the product should do and how it should work. And if you want to go off piste a bit, you may be out of luck, right? But it's an easy option. The middle ground is to go and assemble something. Now, this looks kind of like what I started to show you in the demo, where I've got Terraform doing the actual infrastructure as code. I'm using some kind of pipeline and source code management. And look, all those pieces technically are loosely coupled, so it should be nice and easy. Say nice and easy. Let's call it possible to replace one of them. Like if you want to change your source code from GitHub to GitLab, it shouldn't be the end of the world, right? But you have got to put all these components together, integrate them together. Learn them if you don't already know them. So it's kind of that middle ground where, you're using some products. A lot of those are going to be open source and free, which is a bonus, but you've got to learn them. And then the total other end of the scale where you're just going to build it. And I've got 2 or 3 customers. Admittedly, they're all very large multinational organizations who have just built their own tooling. They've actually built their own firewall management and compliance checking tools. So similar to some of these vendors up here, but they've just kind of done it themselves. In some weird and wonderful languages in some instances. One's a massive Java house, which is quite painful. Now, you can tailor it to your organization at this point. You can integrate it to exactly how your business processes work, which is great. But you've got to have the people and the time and the resources for all of the development of that tool in the first place, to implement it and maintain it. It's not just done when you push it out the door. Everyone knows you've got to keep maintaining software, otherwise it will eventually break. And sometimes quite quickly if you leave it alone to fester. So it gives you this kind of, this sliding scale of represented here. Oops, sorry, back a bit. Represented by ice cream in this situation, where you can just go and buy something. You can go and buy an ice cream sundae out of a tub. It's really, really easy, but you haven't got much flexibility. You get what's in the tub. You can assemble your own ice cream sundae, right? It's a little bit more time and effort, a bit more flexible, but you're still limited by the components that you can buy off the shelf. Or you can just go and get yourself an ice cream maker and literally build the thing from scratch, right? So Weird ice cream analogy, but hopefully it works. Now, once you've got yourself through that, the next stage, I mean, here is an example of the middle ground, right? The assemble option. So customer decided to, they already had ServiceNow operationalized for IT service management. So that was a great place to have the change requests come in. People fill out a form, the form's on ServiceNow. ServiceNow sends the data via a mid server. That's like the way it gets over the internet boundary into the corporate network. Hits off Ansible Tower, Ansible, another infrastructure as code tool, I guess, similar to Terraform, but slightly different. Ansible goes and grabs the latest versions of the playbooks from GitHub and goes and updates the firewalls. And like I said, the nice thing about this, the middle ground example is if you choose to change your IAC tool or your source code tool or your ITSM tool, everything else should be able to stay in place. So it's kind of the one I see most frequently now, and I can see why, and I kind of like it as a middle ground. But your mileage may vary, your opinions may vary. If you want a real life example of this, the folks at Palo Alto Networks have started, which I like, publishing our own IT journey. So there's again a URL here or a QR code if you want to scan it with your phone. And as you can see from this screenshot, we've got our own sort of pipeline and way of doing this. And we've also in the article published some stats about how it reduced the time to change and took manual workload off the staff and things like that. So a really nice real use case. And again, no sales pitch, just information. Category 3, respond. Now at this point, we've deployed our infrastructure, we're making changes day to day, we've done pretty well on our automation journey, but this is all about things happening. The world is not static, as we all know. This list of 5 kind of examples is by no means exhaustive. But these are things that are changing day to day, hour by hour, minute by minute, and sometimes, obviously, if you've deployed a customer-facing application in the cloud, it's running some form of managed Kubernetes, containers are coming and going, things are scaling in and out, IP addresses come and go, FQDNs come and go. You need your access control, whatever is, being the boundary, to be up to date with all of that. And certainly, if all the scale in and scale out is happening automatically, the last thing you want is your access control to be manual. Same with threat intelligence. You may get threat intelligence from open source, and maybe you're not so confident about it, and you get threat intelligence from some paid sources, and you're more confident about those. You want to be able to take action on those automatically in the appropriate way. So I might block straight away on the good threat intelligence that I trust and I'm confident in, but I might want to be a little bit less. I might just alert on the open source stuff just in case I don't want to be blocking things untoward. But there's 5 or 6 different areas you could probably think of yourselves on top of these 5, where the idea here is that in the respond category, these are very specific triggers. So they are defined events that we can think about happening. Maybe ties into the threat modeling, right? You think about the things that could happen, things that could change, things that could happen to us, either in our own internal infrastructure or from the outside. And the whole point of the respond category is we say that the immediacy of requirement of change beats the control aspect of it. So we want to have some very good guardrails around this type of automation. We want it to be very well scoped, by which I mean we say these are the specific things we're going to trigger on, and they are only allowed to automate a response in these specific ways, so that things can't go wild and some kind of response automation basically shuts the whole company down, takes out the internet link or just turns the whole cloud tenant off, something wild like that. So as long as we get good guardrails and we talk about with the rest of the business about what those guardrails and scopes are, then we should be able to bring in some response automation that can really help us where we don't need to really go through change control, and we can just react to things as and when we need to. And arguably, there's another kind of hidden, I guess, from my introduction, section 4, category 4 of security automation, all around assessment. No changes here to the infrastructure like the other 3. I don't do too much in this area, and I don't find it massively interesting. Sorry to everyone who is in these areas, but I need to mention it for completeness because we can't ignore compliance. Our good friends in compliance next door to security quite often. As well as all the vulnerability scanners and checking for your latest attack surface detection. Have we just deployed something in a new cloud and we're not monitoring yet? All those kind of assessment tools. Let's see if we can automate all those as well. Just not something I've got a massive amount of background in, but worth thinking about as well on your journey. So the good news for you is I'm almost done. So I want to return back to what I tried to cover today as quickly as I could in just over 30 minutes. And if you remember, it would start with why. So again, so many customers have had so much better outcomes when they really think at the start why they're doing this and what they're trying to achieve from a business level as opposed to just a technical level. Helps in all sorts of ways with buy-in and funding and various other bits and pieces. Then we got into the how, breaking it down. Don't boil the ocean, good old cliche. And you may not like the classification system we've come up with, the whole deploy, configure, respond, and assess. You may have your own way of thinking about it. That's fine. However you break it down, I don't think it matters. It's just that if you try and automate everything in one go, it's going to be really painful unless you're one of the very few people who has a complete greenfield environment, which I don't think exists many times outside of startups anyway. To get to our goal, which was to try and bring security to a place where by automating it, we obviously have to codify it to get to the automation, but also we're applying the security consistently as possible, as comprehensively as possible. The infrastructure as code was a great example. It doesn't matter what the coder did in their IDE, we always added labels. So everything was always tracked and traced so it could respond and even appropriate cost as well from our cloud appropriately. So hopefully that's what I achieved today. I hope you enjoyed it and got something from it. I'll just replay my handles in case you think that was interesting enough that you're going to go and either look at the code in GitHub or send me some abuse on Twitter. I'm more than up for debate. So yeah, I hope that was good. Nath, any questions?
Yeah,
or anyone actually?
Yeah, I've got one captured in the chat, James, for you. I've got one on my own, but we'll start with Jonathan's, who asks about the IDE plugins, and is that a best endeavor? Is there a way to enforce that locally? And in your experience, are you seeing a lot of people adopt IDEs? Was it just in the pipeline?
It is really best endeavors, and I alluded, if not more than alluded to that when we were chatting about it at the time, right? Because I think you may have got more adoption previously, but I think today it's very much like the world is in a place where you let developers use the tools that are most productive for them. There's various regulated industries and other kind of scenarios where sometimes things are a bit more locked down and a bit more prescriptive. But I think for the masses, people use their IDE of choice, and therefore it's hard to enforce really. So it is best endeavors, you're right, which is why it's only the first place where you can get yourself involved as security to kind of say, hey, look, this might be not by ideal in your Terraform or your cloud formation or whatever it is you're doing, your Kubernetes manifest. So yeah, it is really. There is some adoption of it though, and I really like it. I think people, when I have talked to them, realize that it's not trying to be like a big brother thing. It is that one like Checkoff, and there's others that are similar. They do genuinely try to not only tell you what's wrong, but give you a way out of it rather than just hitting you with a stick. They say, look, here's actually a way that you can fix the thing, and here's why it's wrong. So that's why I think it's starting to get some more adoption.
Yeah, no, that's a real key for me, I must admit, giving you the answers or at least the way forward, rather than just telling you what a naughty person you've been, what a terrible developer you are. Question for me, it's probably a philosophical one really, but should infrastructure guys or developers, should they be worried about automating themselves out of their job?
This is the classic with automation, even outside of security really. You could even take it to car manufacturing and everything, right? But I believe, I haven't seen personally too much of people automating themselves out of a job. There's reasons behind this, and there's a couple of approaches you can take to think about this. One is, if it looks like that might be happening, you want to be the person who's doing the automation instead of the job that's going, right? So you want to do that kind of career sidestep and get into go and understand how pipelines work, go and understand infrastructure as code and do that. And, I don't think the days of people typing out switch configs and by hand in text files are gone yet, because there's enough people with data centers and Cisco switches left. Yeah, there's a lot of cloud adoption, but a lot of companies are really only putting their toe in the water. But also the idea, I think, of automation really, and how we talk to customers about it is, you're not going to automate everything. You have got to start small. And the fact is, if you find that the best place to start with your automation journey is those tasks that are boring, repetitive, but easy to define. And they're probably the things that you hate doing the most because they are boring and repetitive. So you go and get those automated, take those off your plate. And if that gives you an extra hour a day or 2 hours a week or whatever it might be, that's time you can do something much more valuable. I mean, everyone's been told to do more with less, right? And if you never get to paying down some of your technical debt, that's a massively high level statement. But you know, if you're one of those places where if only I had a couple of extra hours, I'd go and fix that thing that we introduced ages ago, and it was only meant to be temporary, and we never got rid of it. You create yourself time to go and do those things. So that's the best way to look at it, I think.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Actually, there's more interesting and fun stuff to be doing, and more strategic stuff. You know, even things like threat modeling or doing things early on, getting the security guys to work with the infrastructure guys around that, and actually getting involved elsewhere, I think is really key. So no, it was a kind of a tongue-in-cheek question, but kind of rhetorical question. Sorry, but yeah, I wanted to ask it on this. Okay, well. I'm conscious of time. There's a Luke, a frequent visitor to this parish, has got a comment in there for you. I'll let you digest that, perhaps to yourself. But what we'll do is, conscious of time, like I said, I'll let's take a quick. Well, sorry, James, that's really interesting. I actually read that article today on the Palo's network. Actually, only this afternoon. Just because I was reminding myself, so I read that this morning, so I was really interested to see that pop up as well. So yeah, thanks again, mate, for doing that talk. Thanks as always. Okay then, let's crack on. Thanks again, James. Really excellent talk. Keith, are you ready?
Always ready.
Coming in from well, not your beachfront house today. It's something more Washington DC there.
It's a detective scenario, which shouldn't be lost on a lot of people. Bearing in mind, I end up doing a lot of post-mortem work, especially you know, in the when we have incidents, but it doesn't happen that often. But it's an interesting thing to get involved in. So,
okay, crack on then, Keith. I'll leave it with you.
So what I'll say is that this session is going to be the complete antithesis of what James's excellent presentation was, in that this is going to be an opportunity to just decompress a little. It's a very gentle introduction to threat modeling, but don't underestimate the simplicity of this, because this is something that you can actually do, and you can do it tomorrow. And as soon as the whole idea for me, and I've had the pleasure of working with Nathan previously, is my big thing is about left shifting security. It's not appropriate for engineering teams to get feedback way too late in the process. For me, it's all about bringing that right back to the very beginning and making sure that they get something that has got security baked in. And so let me just share this screen now. Here we go. I'm pretty certain that you can see this.
Not quite yet, Keith. It's coming.
That's because I didn't hit the share.
There we go. You're good now.
Anyhow, this really is going to be a very gentle introduction to something that you can use in a very practical way. It's also full disclosure, something that I absolutely use right now in my current role. So a little bit about me. Cool, look at that. I really should get somebody to take some more professional photographs and touch them up for me. I've been doing this a pretty long time, and the TLDR in this is I'm Sayon's Group Application Security Architect. I've built a career out of looking for innovation, looking for simplicity, and using that to drive security posture across all types of organizations, startups, scale-ups, and large organizations also. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to cover three things. I'm going to give you a little bit of a brief description. I meant description, obviously, of what threat modeling is, why it's important, and just how to get started in a simple way. So, threat modeling, it sounds really complicated. It isn't. In simple terms, what you're looking at doing is identifying what your potential threats are, what the attack surfaces are, and what you're going to do to safeguard yourself against them. It's part of a good risk management approach. With risk management, the idea is to describe in simple terms where you're going to be vulnerable and get decisions made on the best way of dealing with them. Sometimes people look at risks and they say, well, you know, why do we have to do something about it? And this is where threat modeling comes in. So what are you actually going to need to do this? Well, you're going to have to understand what your product is. You're going to need to understand where it becomes vulnerable. You need to know what you can control and what you're dependent on. Then you can decide what actions you're going to take. But importantly, you need to be able to validate what you're putting down. And you need to verify that the actions that you've taken have been successful. Now, the four questions I'm often asked, and quite rightly, is what are we up against? You know, why do we need to do this? Well, the reality is that out there, you've got highly motivated people who have got knowledge, tools, and time on your hands. Now, if you are an organization that deals in personal identifiable data or data of any sort that is valuable to you, you are a target. And a lot of people get a bit confused when it comes to thinking about hackers. And they think that they're either these shady characters that live in bunkers with flickering lights and lots of green screens, or they think that you know, they're children that have been onto the dark web and picked up some scripts and are mucking around and get all giddy when they get an opportunity to access a badly secured site. The reality is that these people that you need to worry about do this for a living. And they spend a lot of time doing reconnaissance on your systems. We'll think about that shortly. So what do you actually need? Well, quite simply, we are going to describe a repeatable process that identifies and addresses threats. And it's something that is going to be lightweight enough to be adopted into a team's DNA. And it also must provide benefits greater than the effort put into it. That's really important, because why would you want to spend time and effort on something that doesn't give you a good return? And that's the fundamental of what James was saying with automation. Why spend time and effort on things that give you marginal improvements? Get that automated. And for me, if you make something that's lightweight, usable and useful, people are going to use it. And when do you need to start all of this? Well, now. You know, you're constantly under attack these days. So the earlier you start, the more time you have to figure out what your priorities are and how to go about it. And of course, why do it? Well, what you want is something that helps you deliver a more secure set of products, something that's going to improve your security posture, and it's going to instill confidence in both your internal and external stakeholders. I work in an organization where, you know, personal identifiable data is at the core of their business. If we fail to secure that data, the reputational damage is just enormous. Okay, little 5-second history lesson here. Threat modeling, it goes all the way back to 1994. And if you get a chance to read the book, Fundamentals of Computer Security Technology, you will absolutely just fall on the floor. It is described in such a complicated way. But there again, we're back in the early days of computing. So everything was very, very formally written and lots of complicated diagrams. But since then, things have moved along quite a lot. And you've had many, many different frameworks. The one that we'll be looking at today is Stride, and that was built by Microsoft, but you have other interesting acronyms such as PASTA, which I tend to avoid because it makes me hungry. Now, Stride is literally, as it says right there, it is spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and the elevation of privilege. And the properties there are basically describe an extended CIA triad. So that's something which is very, very commonly used in security terms. Now, as I said, I have a tendency to want to simplify things as much as I can. So I'll go through Stride, you know, in a very business friendly way. So the 6 questions are: can someone gain access with a false, stolen, or no identity? Can someone change data as it flows through your application? Can we prove somebody did something that they deny doing? Can someone be given information they could use against us? Can someone crash or reduce the availability of the application? And can someone assume the identity of a privileged user? Now, information disclosure is a really interesting one for me, because what we need to be really conscious of is that we are not giving out clues as to how our infrastructure or application or service comes together. It's these sort of things, when I described earlier, professional hackers do this surveillance, do this probing to get a good sense of where their potential for getting a hook in sits. Now, I'm going to, for the purposes of this, I'm just going to describe 4 roles here. And these are the roles which are important to actually get going with the next part of the puzzle. So we're looking for somebody who's responsible for the vision, roadmap, and end-to-end delivery of your product, your application, your service, or whatever. You're looking for somebody responsible that's going to be defining good practice around technologies and their frameworks. That person will be somebody that contributes to designs and will provide assurance. Somebody that does nearly the same thing, but with a security viewpoint. In this instance, this is the sort of thing that I get involved in. And for me, I do a lot of education of product owners and developers and everybody that's involved in delivering these products. And the last one is something that we've been very successful at doing. And that is building out people within product teams who have a responsibility for driving the security as a quality measure. And quite often these are lead developers. To say that we're pretty successful at this, we have about 10% of our lead developers within the teams, which are, well, actually not 10% of the lead developers, 10% of the developer population that are security champions, and these are quite often lead developers. We're also going to need something that we can fill out. And I mentioned the questions earlier on. In this instance, they're a little bit more fleshed out because we create lots of microservices and APIs. Therefore, for me, it makes sense to make sure it's explicit that we describe a user as something that can be a human user, or it can be a non-human user, an API, a service, or whatever is calling your other API, or whatever is trying to get to the webhooks, etc. Now, in this example, what I also have included is that it's not enough for a simple one set of columns here to say as answers to that question. For me, there are always 3 states that you're going to be in. You're going to be handling something which is inbound. You're going to be handling something which you are processing. And you could be handling something which is on the outbound stretch. And so for me, it's really important to actually differentiate between those, because as things move through your application, that they will be treated in different ways. And I said about being able to do this tomorrow. You can absolutely do this tomorrow. The first time round to build out this model that is described by the matrix we had previously will take maybe an hour. It might take 2 hours if you don't have a good contextual diagram that describes how your application joins together with all its various components. But in this instance, you have the architect, the security champion, and the product owner sitting together to build this out. In reality, I also join that session to facilitate, to drive questions, because at the end of the day, this is all about me making people think. So what we're going to do in this first time round? Well, we're going to describe what it is that we're building. That's where the contextual diagrams come in. From that, we're going to decide what the critical assets are, where they're potentially vulnerable, and what are the consequences if that vulnerability is manages to be exploited. And out of that, we get to decide how we're going to deal with them and prioritize how they're going to be tackled. And that's why it's important that the product owner is part of that group, because quite often product owners are focused on features, revenue generating features generally. And so it's a good opportunity for them to understand why they need to set aside time. And it's a very very useful way of introducing elements of reducing security debt, or even reducing technical debt, in a way in which doesn't automatically get groomed out of a backlog. So once we've actually built this and it's there, well, what happens then? Well, at the beginning of each subsequent sprint, you'll take maybe 15 minutes to verify that the model still holds true based on new features, platforms, or whatever else is being introduced during that sprint, and to be able to make necessary changes to that model. And that literally is, a very quick thing to do at the beginning of your sprint planning. Now, there's an interesting element, which is what happens in the meantime. Well, on an ongoing basis, what I do is I gather data. I've got access to lots of lovely data from security tools, pen testing results, threat intelligence, and it allows me to look at whether there are any other attack vectors which have been missed, and also to identify any systemic issues and feed those back into the threat model, giving that that improvement loop going forward. Now, what I've described here really doesn't take a lot of effort to get things moving. It doesn't take a lot of effort or investment to maintain it. There's no big learning curve. There's no outlay on expensive software. So there really is no excuse why not to do it. And of course, that's the end of these particular slides. It's not the end of the story. So I've built this, I've used this. where do we go from there? Well, what we're doing is we are moving into the pipeline now, not to replace this, but to augment it. We are actually using a tool called 3Agile, and it provides a lot of the lovely documentation, the diagrams that help support where you are and the changes over time. So there we are. Let's have some questions if we've got some.
Yeah, cheers, Keith. I've got a question actually. Can I kick off?
Absolutely, you can.
Actually, an observation first. I think 3 words that you said, I think for me is really key for threat modeling, and they're 3 very simple words. And I think you said something like making people think. And that's not to say that people don't think when they're building apps or deploying infrastructure as code or doing all of that, and that's absolutely not what I would be driving at. But getting people to then stand back again and think more about it, or think differently, potentially out their comfort zone, perhaps. I think it's a real good message, I think.
Well, you're absolutely right. And for me, and I say this a lot at work, if the one thing I can do is make you think about security, then that's a big tick in my mind. Because you do get a lot of pressure to focus on features, and there's when I joined my current organization, speaking with the developers, a common comment was, oh, do we really need to think about this? But we've got a security team. I said, you do need to think about this, because security is everyone's responsibility. And the earlier that we adopt good practice and we look at ways to ensure that we're not just accumulating security debt, and indeed technical debt, because these quite often go hand in hand. We need to focus on these things, because these are the things that will that will save us time and money and a lot of headaches, especially as you're getting a lot of organizations moving towards you build it, you own it, you run it. Okay, so it becomes even more of a focus to get things right quickly and to surface your security vulnerabilities early so you can do something about it. That's why it's really important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So a couple of questions have come in whilst you're answering that. I will go with, well, Jonathan's got a kind of a 2-pronged question here. So I'll throw them both at you. So threat modeling I think we all know, can become technical at times. You can get very much in the weeds quite quickly, and that might even be a bit of might even put people off. So Jonathan's asking, firstly, how do you keep product owners engaged? And then do you advocate having a whole team during that? You talked about 3 key people along with yourself to kind of the orchestra, but who else could be involved?
So the product owner, and I'm going to apologize in advance to anybody of a sensitive nature. The product owner absolutely should be the person whose bits are on the block should there be an incident involving their product. Okay, that's why when I wrote the application security policy for this particular organization, there is a lot in there that describes the responsibilities of a product owner, specifically with regard to application security. I like to make things balanced. So it's absolutely right for, you know, and the bare bones was these people. However, I actually do like having a business analyst there. That's the product owner must be there. I would even have somebody that's a UX person there, because we're looking at a holistic approach to attack vectors. So absolutely, I don't have any rules as such for who can and can't be at these sessions. I like to keep them relatively small, because you don't want to have 15 people turn up to a session, because, as we all know, nothing will ever get done. There's too much interference being played, because you can't take all of those people on the same journey at the same time, and they have subtly different understandings, and so you're spending a lot of time actually just managing that, rather than simply getting to a point where you say, okay, look, this is what our thing looks like. Are we assured that we've covered all of these aspects? But yeah, business focus is absolutely key.
Well, actually, you hit on a point there that I think Pravin has asked in actually an extension of Jonathan's question, and what Pravin is asking is, well, we can't all be experts in all the things. We'd love to get you as an AppSec expert in the room. We'd love to get James as an automation and infrastructure guy in the room, but that's not always the case. So how do we fill those gaps? Is it so
the gaps, and it comes, and scanning down here, the idea of security champions. So quite simply for me, I said from the get-go, I said, I cannot clone myself, and I cannot be in multiple places at once. Therefore, what I need are people within the product community to take on, to shoulder some of that advocacy. And the thing that I provide them is knowledge and good practice and support and a sense of community. And we are an absolute community. I bring them innovation and tools and things like that, and it is pushed that way. But in these instances, you know, the first time round, I'm always there. I'm the one that's going to be guiding. I'm the one that's going to be making you think about various things. So the role of security champions is really important. Now, the majority of mine are lead developers, but I also have some test engineers in there and some business analysts as well, all of which volunteered. I said to them, I said, I don't care what your background in security is or isn't. This is all about finding people who have a passion to help drive improvement. And we're all going to be lifelong learners. But you know, this is the way in which we're going to do it.
Is that the carrot, their own enthusiasm, as James asks, or what's the Krispy Kreme
that is the carrot
virtually?
So that is absolutely the carrot. My champions get access to stuff early. They get access to participate in various events. For example, we've just signed a contract with Secure Code Warrior to provide a gamified training platform for the developer community. And as part of that, I'm, number one, giving the security champions early access to our platform. Number two, I'm making them team managers within the platform so they can instigate tournaments, team versus team, squad versus squad, country versus country. You know, we can be very, very flexible and build these things out on the fly. We've piloted that platform, and the developer community loved it. So that's the carrot, you know, giving them the ability to administer security tooling in a way which is going to benefit their teams. What's the stick? The stick is that this is embedded into our application security policy. It's also embedded into our engineering policy as well. So it's something that teams will get measured on. And indeed, you know, because you're actually creating something tangible, we can actually validate that you have one of these things. We can validate the last time that you touched it, and actually be able to use that data along with all of our other data points to be able to measure security maturity. And that, for me, that's the goal. I want the organization's security maturity to increase.
Yeah, absolutely. Quick question from me, actually, is the template that you showed us, Keith, with the questions.
Yeah.
Are they standard questions that you always ask, or was that just a sample?
So that's the sample. The reality is the elements that are static, the 6 elements of the stride model are static, but over time you will develop more questions, because not all services are the same, not all applications are the same. There may well be, dependent on your deployment method, other elements in there that you're going to be worrying about. But that's the whole point of going through and doing this modeling. It's getting you to think about, oh, actually, well, how does that relate to X, Y, and Z? And that's how you augment that model. The template there is the absolute standard starting point.
And what's behind the answers? Do you have any kind of automated or templated response, depending if I tick?
I do.
Now, is it A, B,
I do actually. I was a little bit cheeky and didn't expose it all, because what I do have is an initial scoring mechanism, which will actually highlight and choose a bunch of different questions to go in there based on what your technology set looks like, whether or not you're a publicly facing element, or whether you're an internal service and things like that.
Yeah, no, and actually thinking of what OWASP can provide, actually, I think what might be really neat, and you can have this RFE for free, Keith, if you choose, is almost have kind of links to some of the great stuff that OWASP have. Like, you could have proactive controls behind some of those answers. So it could be, I'll take a very obvious one that always people talk about, threat modeling around encryption and confidentiality. Yeah. You could then link that into a proactive control from OWASP.
So within our organization, end-to-end encryption is mandated, not just from the outside in, but regardless. So anything which is data in transit, at rest, or during processing must be encrypted for us. So that's a very, very a strong stance we take on that, because we have to.
No, of course, yeah. You could even then link that into the good stuff that James was talking about and codify that almost.
Absolutely right. But for me, when I set out to do this, this is something, as I said, this is something that you could do tomorrow. This isn't something that you're going to need to set up. There are no real tools that you're going to need. It's just a case of get in there and get started, and then you can get more sophisticated later on. But for me, you know, humans are very good at putting things off. So, oh yeah, we could do this, but let's go and investigate what tools we're going to use later on down the road. It's like, no, we're going to start now, and we're going to start our learning process. We're going to start thinking, and we're going to start doing.
Well, yeah, well, for me, 18 months ago, or, you know, before pre-pandemic, threat modeling just needed two things: a bunch of post-it notes and a bunch of pens. And as long as you've got a wall to stick it on, or someone's head, or whatever,
is this any different to that? In reality, it's a guided exercise that makes you think. And that's the real point.
Yep. Last question then, Keith. Or a couple of questions. Jonathan's firing them in thick and fast. Security champions, volunteer time. Where's the money coming from, Keith? You're telling me we need to these people, but I need them coding, or I need them doing stuff.
So this is this is something that our organization takes very, very seriously. And, you know, when I set about it, I actually talked to a whole bunch of the product owners to say, listen, you know, this is what's coming. This is not a nice to have. This is something that's vitally important to you as a product owner, for the reasons that I mentioned before. You know, as an organization, we literally deal in personal identifiable data, and therefore, if we have a scenario where data's exfiltrated, you know, you're going to be turning somersaults trying to figure out how you're going to get this sorted out. It also stops that behavior. There's nothing worse than you've got a nice product roadmap, you've mapped out in your various sprints and stuff like that, what relates and is going to get delivered when. And then all of a sudden, you have an incident, or let's say it gets caught before that. There's a pen test and a whole bunch of stuff comes up. What does that actually do to your roadmap? Well, it's massively disruptive. Everything goes on hold. Everybody scrambles to try and fix this thing, and it goes through a whole bunch of test cycles again until it gets a clean bill of health, and then it's then you try and salvage what you can for the subsequent sprints. That's wrong. You know, you spend the time thinking about these things up front, managing your security posture to make sure that your engineering teams are getting good quality, actionable insight at every step along the way. That's what's going to maintain the rhythm of your product. So because they understand that, you know, it's a given. And I don't expect a lot of time to be taken away from the practice of delivery. On the contrary, you know, this is something where we are building in these capabilities into the team so that they can be self-sufficient and be able to think in a far more secure way. And case in point, and the reason why we've gone and bought a gamified platform for security is that engineers aren't really taught what good security practice is. They're not taught how to code defensively. You know, I still shake my head when I'm seeing cross-site scripting and SQL injection and unsanitized input. There really is no excuse for this in 2021, but we still got it. And so, you know, this is all about trying to, to avoid these things.
Well, yes, where would the OWASP top 10 be if it wasn't for SQL injection and cross-site scripting? And I'm sure when the next one comes out, which I'm not sure if it's this year or perhaps next year, I'm sure it will still have injection attacks still there, right front and centre.
You can almost guarantee what the top 5 is going to be right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
What I tend to look at, and although I've got a lot of time for the OWASP top 10, is looking at the 25 most dangerous habits, in development.
Yeah, cool. Conscious of time, but there's questions. You've really, well, not unnerved here, that's probably the wrong expression, but you've piqued people's interest. I'm just trying to scroll back. Sarah had a question. I cannot find it now. Oh, automated threat modeling tools, Security Compass. Yeah,
I've looked at a whole bunch of them. We're going with 3 Agile. It's a nice tool. I thoroughly enjoyed watching the demos at DEF CON. So there are a whole bunch of tools that you can take later. This is all about doing something now.
Absolutely. So I was just trying to scroll through then in case there's a few come in. There was another one. Yes, Dave has sent in a question about, well, keeping track of all the issues effectively, a central repository of findings or issues.
Yeah, well, what we have is we have everything in Atlassian, and I harvest out of that. So each team has their own defined structure, and I've got some automation that goes through and allows me to actually look at various aspects that way.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. I just want to, if people aren't keeping an eye on the chat, there's been some great back and forth. I appreciate everyone who's chipped in, not just with questions, but also helping people out with answers as well. I think there's been a number of back and forth as well. Just to call out that Sam, the legend that is Sam Stepanian, hi Sam, has posted a couple of links around security champions as well. Links I wasn't aware of, so I'll be checking them out over the next couple of days. And yes, the defect, that's always a good one as well to centralise all those findings.
For me, the thing to do is just to make us start doing things. Nothing's ever perfect. So, whatever's going to work for you and give you the best bang for your buck. And for me, everything that I introduce has to have a purpose. It has to deliver more than it costs in whichever way you choose to deliver a cost. But it has to be usable. It has to be useful. Otherwise, people just aren't going to do it.
No, absolutely. Okay, I think that's all of it. For some reason, my Zoom screen has gone a bit awry.
Well, the last thing, of course, and similar with James, feel free to get in touch. I'm very happy to be part of this community and share my experience and listen to others. We're all on a learning curve together.
No, absolutely, and I will offer my thanks as well, Keith, for being a return presenter. Really interesting. You obviously piqued a number of people's interest on questions anyway, maybe down to the audience we have tonight, who knows, but thanks from me. Okay, so I think we've made some good time there, actually. I want to thank, again, James and Keith for being on this evening. I hope everyone's got a lot of value out of that. I have, for certain. And of course, we will be putting this on our YouTube channel over the next few days. There's on the screen now is our other social media. You're more than welcome to follow us, visit our chapter pages, our LinkedIn groups, Slack, and all those good things. So we're there, and hopefully we'll be back soon in the community, whether virtual potentially, and at some point in person in the not too distant future. Fingers crossed onto that. So thanks everyone for their questions as well. I'm just looking over. Yeah, I appreciate everyone's efforts. That's what I like about it, actually. Questions come in and people are actually answering the questions as we go along. Not that Keith or even James needs any help being experts in their area, but that's great to see nonetheless. Okay, well, I'll let you know when it's up on YouTube over the next few days via the Meetup and other channels. So look out for that. And if you've missed some of it or all of it or want to share, then that'd be great. But I'd like to wish you all a good evening. Enjoy. It's raining here, I'm afraid. But enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll speak soon. So I'll bid everyone a good evening. Bye, everyone.